Mungo.
Hi, Rita.
Hi, everyone. So we are here to talk about time and life.
Time and life.
And all its complexity. Mungo, I was wondering if you could start out on this discussion talking about what I kind of consider the gateway into this work, which is a series of meditations on the design of Time magazine, Life magazine. You've over the years you've engaged everything from Jack Chick and the Chick tracts to National Geographic to Time and Life magazines.
Right.
And I think that kind of is, for me, the kind of background knowledge that is kind of interesting for you to talk about.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's almost so, I almost take that kind of absorption of my environment, which includes branding and corporate design and mass media, so for granted that it's almost hard to talk about it as an entry point. But I know that certainly early on, when you mentioned like the Jack Chick, when I made my own sort of religious tract, aping those born again Christian comic books, it was really, I wanted people to mistake my artwork for one of those.
Yeah,
and there was always a kind of a counterfeit aspect, or like a sneak attack or something, where I was trying to sort of smuggle my agenda into a familiar trope that people would engage with more readily before they recognized it as art, So that, and then there was a lot of instances of that sort of tactic, and then with jumping ahead a little bit to like the Time projects, starting with one that I did with you at LACMA, was the Time magazine logo over its 100-year history, and sort of time happening to the word time, drawings of the logo, one per year of the magazine. And we did a book at LACMA together at that time, and that led into the Time Mirror works and various other things. And that was always just sort of trying to speak about really big sweeping things like time through a lens of, how do you talk about something so massive? You just go to the thing that we all agree is already about that. The thing that already has some degree of consensus or enough eyeballs on it already that you can sort of use that as shorthand to get to the part that you want to talk about. I thought you were going to say the entry to these works was the Rolodex film, which
I was going to say that next.
Okay.
I mean, because there's the graphic design component, and there's the countercultural component, at least with the Jack Chick tracts. But then there's also those experimental films, a sort of meditation on repetition, structural films. The one with Margot Levin, and you could talk a bit about that, which I always thought was such a genius way of deconstructing structuralist film.
Yeah.
And then vis-a-vis the, something so mundane as the Rolodex. It is, in essence, it is. But then with this film, there's something quite transformative if you know all of sort of the names and numbers and stars and asterisks.
It was sort of a way to take that sort of aesthetics of administration of conceptual art and sort of make it fun. And that was always something I wanted to do too, was make things that I found a little bit staid or insular about fine art or conceptual art and make them a little more broadly appealing, more accessible. And so to me, the way to approach Margot Levin's Rolodex and this history that it represented, working with her and seeing it on the desk all the time, and it's full of all these, the names of all these artists and curators and historians and collectors, but also the florist and the alarm person and the liquor person and the customs person. And so I chose to make a stop motion film about it and then bring it to life. No fingers are visible, it's just flapping and rolling. And then you see all these names going by at high speed. And there was something so perceptually interesting about that to me. But it was also about that juncture where she no longer needed her Rolodex because they had a bunch of computers in the gallery at that point. And so it was that digital analog divide that the Rolodex represented, and of course I had to make it on celluloid film for it to be these sort of two turning wheels in conversation, and the fluttering projector provided the soundtrack for the flipping Rolodex, and so they were sort of independent. And at the same time, my film became that archive. It was like a data dump from the Rolodex, from her Rolodexes to my film. So even if those are lost, you still have my film. And so a bunch of those principles exist in the Time Life project.
Right.
As like data dumps or like sort of spares, but also all those analog digital concerns. The moment of digitization of books becoming, and high-speed book scanning robots becoming like filmmaking apparatus.
Exactly. That's what I was going to ask you next. I mean, that then goes from this form of animation, and I like that, thinking about the term animation, its multiple meanings, because you're reanimating basically dead media. And the slide machine, all of the photographic elements that you see in the handbook, in these various time life, or, these various, they're manuals really, manuals for living, manuals for learning, manuals for knowledge, and they're all now outmoded. They're now archaic forms of another time of consuming knowledge. So I suppose the question then is like going from time and the very the symbology of the Time magazine cover and the passage of time to this piece. How did you make that jump into this?
I guess both Time magazine was a presence in my house growing up, and so were Time Life books, and I think they, between those two, they're, I don't want to oversell the 1970s as this pre-Reagan utopia, but there was a post-war boom that produced the middle class in this country that Time Life books and Time magazine were very much a feature of, the American century. It was a world where, my dad could put 3 kids through California colleges on a county job, and in ways that are not possible now. And so I think those things have always been rattling around in my head, sort of autobiographically speaking, but also, and then there was sort of the promise of those books as if you could just pour this into your head, you would know everything. Sort of a antecedent to the internet.
Right.
Sort of an analog, early proto-internet that arrived in your home, and different graphic design treatments and different experts and different networks of people editing them on everything from cooking to home improvement to fine art to sewing to outer space and mathematics and understanding computers, which is a really amazing series from the 80s, which is like, talk about outmoded. It's like, and then later, mysteries of the unknown and, UFOs and Bigfoot and stuff like that. And
that's an interesting shift to, we were talking about it briefly the other day, from the utopian aspirations of obtaining everything from learning about mineralogy to macrame to then the later period of
like niche conspiracy, it's like niche conspiracy and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's one of the most popular,
my favorite. Yeah.
most popular series.
I have that whole series.
Oh yeah, they're printed with silver ink and they're really beautiful.
Exactly.
I should mention, like, that notion of making encyclopedic things has always been with me. And when I made that Crickets work a few years ago, that was an orchestra performing a score based on the transcription of crickets. It was really important to me that it be, the source material be crickets from around the world. And it just so happened that allowed for the orchestra, for the performance to move around the orchestra, for there to be percussion solos and clarinet solos and flute solos and then ensemble perform, and for it to be dynamic and but also to be broadly representative. And that video, Everything Abridged, that was just played, it's a 17-minute, it's the longest and fastest piece in the series so far, and it's every sort of three-dimensional object made by humans since prehistory. And the origin of that is that I was nominated to be the artist in residence at the Smithsonian in 2008. And you make a proposal and they accept it or not. And I proposed a film called Everything, which was going to be one frame of film for every object in the Smithsonian collection. And this was just thrown out. I didn't know there's 11 million objects in this collection, and this would have involved such a collaboration between every different agency at the Smithsonian. They were like, go to hell, basically. So, but that idea really stayed with me, and then in the sort of vernacular of the Time Life Project, it became, I can just pull these from books, So it was still a massive effort. But but just sort of speaking to the encyclopedic impulse and sort of wanting, because I wanted to see that, I wanted to see what that looked like. And, whether or not I absorbed that knowledge is another question, but yeah.
Yeah, and then absorption, that's interesting because what happens across these, I'll call them chapters. I don't think you call them chapters.
Volumes.
Volumes.
Yeah, they're sort of released in volumes like Time Life Books was.
Exactly. Very different stylistic approaches. One, you could say, is pretty much reproducing that technology. How do you say it? Technology. I'm trying to say the technology of vision. So the machine vision. Machine vision is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
I should have started that from the beginning. Machine vision, you're trying to reproduce that machine vision. So in other words, it's very much like the scanning mechanism for some of them.
Right.
And then others are quite more elaborate and involve more overlay, editing, the editing software that you're using that allows for more animation, motility. And then there's this other tendency where you're looking at the object and you go both deep inside so that we actually see dot. We see what the layering of these dots does to our vision and how we see things, and then also pulling out and seeing the actual
book
binder,
object.
the
Yeah,
book
yeah,
object, the place on which you're scanning these up,
Yeah.
you know, the whole scanning mechanism.
Yeah, and these are just
Was this just through the
whimsical,
experimentation?
experimentation
Okay, that's what I
decisions
was-
largely.
that
And
was
each one is like, I think this is the right treatment here,
Yeah.
and some of them are more involved and difficult. I guess I should mention that as a sort of rubric for the project, when I was thinking about making these films, following the Rolodex film, knowing I wanted to do more stop motion and knowing I was interested in this sort of encyclopedic idea, I had this idea to start working with Time Life books. And the early efforts at that were really unwatchable. And because they were kind of just like book
Were they
scan, it was just like
just-
the book.
Okay.
And
right.
and it didn't work the way the Rolodex film had where there was this delight to it. And
You had to really incorporate more of a choreography.
yeah, and I realized I had to make experimental films. And
Exactly.
but I knew also that as a framework, I wanted, since I was thinking about digitization and this juncture, which is a very Gen X generational juncture between, the first half of our lives was films and books and vinyl
Rotary
records
telephones.
and rotary telephones and in our 20s the internet came along and sort of has in the last 20, 30 years demolished all of those old things. And it's not nostalgia exactly, but it is trying to look at what is lost as we progress, and especially as we progress more deeply into our phones and sort of the mania that results in what that does to our brains. I think quite a bit about that. But the book scanning robot is, they of course the Getty has book scanning robots, but they are about preserving the book, and it's a illustrated manuscript. It must be treated preciously. But meanwhile, Google wants to digitize every book in the world for the internet, and they employ these robots that destroy the book, and they shoot them at 8 frames a second. So that is my animation speed for these. They also happen to make a lot of percussive clatter. So like the lenses are clicking, the pages are flapping, the keys on the computer are clicking, and that is where I sort of drew, okay, that's my frame rate, and that is my soundtrack. So that's why I started working with percussionists and experimental musicians. And so that sort of became the framework for approaching these pieces. And the funny thing about everything video is 12 frames a second. 12 frames a second is about the speed of a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Slower than that, and you begin to see the seams. You begin to see the steps between frames. And I think that is what I want, is that you buy the illusion at the same time that you see it being built. So that sort of balance is the thing that I'm trying to strike. And it's visible in a bunch of the projects themselves too. Like the hummingbird, for example. Can I get you to believe that this is a hummingbird flying around, even though it's made from thousands of still photographs pulled from books on hummingbirds? Or the candle is, over 1,000 photos of candles pulled from tons of books. And there's all this swirling noise around the candle burning down, but can I get you to look at it? So that's sort of like, and that's very much like our level of distraction in the world at this point anyway. So it's sort of, to some degree, about that, about attention, immersion, distraction.
I think with that last
Absorption.
one too, absorption, there's a sort of melancholy too for that candle, at least from watching it, feeling like there's something somber, and then the sound of the of the record scratching.
Yeah, it's a vinyl. It's an ASMR vinyl record that I pulled off YouTube.
Right. Right.
And I liked that there was sort of a trompe l'oeil aspect. Like it did sound a little like a burning candle, but it is like our generation's sort of media
falling asleep,
media background
record,
sound,
you know,
used to soothe,
yes.
for a new generation.
And you worked with some really amazing musicians. You were mentioning that, Lee Ronaldo, Ernst Carroll. I wasn't familiar.
Yeah, he's great. He did the Rodin film from the last set.
Right. And then also like people who do more like field recordings, the Paradise Sound people. You could talk a little bit about
the Hummingbird. So the Hummingbird soundtrack is a Foley soundtrack made by a place called Paradise Sound Group in Hollywood. And I worked with them, and my instructions were, I want you to score this flying hummingbird, but I want you to only use the sound of paper. So the sound of that is just flapping paper in one of those studios where they literally have put shoes on their hands and walk through on concrete to make footsteps. And that was really fun. And the Everything score is a Ligeti piece from 1962, which is 100 metronomes playing at once, and I worked with a guy to record a new performance of it. And this was my second collaboration with Lee Ronaldo. Previously, he let me use a field recording he had made of Hurricane Sandy. And this time, I found a guitar manual on my dad's bookshelf after he died. And this is also very much about a generational step, because it was a really anomalous book to find on my dad's bookshelf, because he was a banjo player, acoustic guitar player. He was in a bluegrass band for 60 years. And he had this guitar manual that it was like the encyclopedia of guitar chords, and it's every single possible chord playable on a guitar. And in it are pictures of Eddie Van Halen and Jimi Hendrix, and I'm pretty sure my dad would not know who those people were. He was like, I was into Bob Dylan. I couldn't get him into Bob Dylan. He was like Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie guy. And he and my mom went on one of their first dates to a Pete Seeger concert. And so I asked Lee Ronaldo to play every single possible chord on a guitar, about 1,800 of them. And he was game to do it, I'm lucky to say. And he was like, as long as you mix it. So, and John McIntyre from Tortoise, a group I've been into for 30 years, agreed to do the score for the Seashells video. So I've been really lucky with collaborations. Aiko Ishibashi for that very abstract work is rock microstructure. That's rocks seen through telescopes, microscopes from geology textbooks. And she had a song that I just felt was perfect. And it's been...
I love that one too, because I was going to veer into this, that there is there's a direct link to experimental film there, the Len Lai, I was thinking of Stan Brakhage very much, just where all of a sudden then you kind of go back to this early experimenting with experimental film, legacy of experimental film. And so there's a lot of cinematic tropes too that you're playing with. The other one that's, I think we didn't really talk about, maybe we could just go into questions after this, but the one that's so incredible to me is what is probably a manual for artists. I think it is actually.
The pottery or the nudes?
The nudes.
Yeah.
The nudes, that's one. They both are. But they are both obviously for students of art.
Right. Yeah. The pottery one is probably more mass market, because that's just something that anybody could try.
Yeah.
But the life model books are really like Drawing 101.
Right.
And they literally advertise themselves as, if you don't have a life drawing class to go to, use this book. And some of them have easels so they can stand up like a little tent and you draw from them.
Right.
And they have these people revolving on a turntable. And I, just as a genre, I was so sort of taken with it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I find these books and they just,
yes, they.
Or like the Seashells video,
life.
the Seashells book I found, that's just one giant collection. Uh-huh. And as soon as I found that book at the last bookstore downtown, I was like, here's a film, So sometimes they're really just like, they're very easy.
But for that one, you're really kind of going into the graphic.
Well, the images are only so big.
Sort of bubbling,
Yeah, so the halftone that constitutes the image is very visible.
Right.
And again, that's a little bit like what I was saying before. Can I get you to see both the total form and the parts? Mm-hmm. And it goes for the films at large too. Can I get you to see the whole and each part and each frame?
Right. Okay.
So, there's always that sort of, I want the cellular composition of the thing to be visible.
Exactly. Well, I think we can open it up because we're going to transition to another space and time, gallery. But if anyone has any questions? Yeah?
Rita, you mentioned a number of films that you thought were referential to Mungo's work. I was wondering, Mungo, what films inspired you, which you've seen that you see as referential to your work?
I mean,
either from popular culture or from the art world.
Well, I would just quickly mention that Barry Lyndon by Stanley Kubrick is maybe my favorite film, and in the candle video there's a bunch of candles from a book on the making of Barry Lyndon. There's also a bunch of candles from the making of Game of Thrones, and also home decor catalogs and stuff like that, and magic books and stuff. But yes, some 60s, 70s independent 16 millimeter stuff like the flicker is important. These were all, as soon as you work with in this high speed way, you're starting to go into that, is it the hypnagogic, cinema of that time. And of course, but I don't know that I was ever intentionally aping anything. But I knew when I was working on the Rocks video, I was like, oh, this is a little like Brackage, But
it's. Did you do a Nam June Paik?
Oh yeah, and I've previously done. I took a Nam June Paik film called Zen for Film, which is just clear white leader going through a projector and collecting the dust of the space. I got a used copy of it and made a negative print. So I've done certain. I've actually used some of that material previously, but. Yeah, I mean, it's also embedded that it's not really one-to-one. It's in my DNA, and it's sprinkled throughout.
And then one more question.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about the Rolodex. Remind me how many Rolodexes were at Margot?
She had like 6,
okay.
I think. And there was one for every desk, and they had different people's handwriting in them.
And in that series, you talked about how it was this analog thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that you made it into a digital thing and preserved it in a way. So if those were destroyed, that's a record. But it made me think that in making the videos from the books, you destroy the books to make the videos, right? You cut them up, and the books no longer exist.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you have any feelings about that?
Well, so Margot's Rolodexes are at the Getty. Her whole archive is at the Getty.
Yeah.
And so those are preserved forever. They also have my film.
But the Getty could burn down. We were looking at that.
That's a good point. But I never made that digital. That is I have a digitized version of that film, but that was all analog. that was all celluloid, and which is a huge hassle, and relative to digital. So when I embarked on this project, I always knew it was going to be video, digital video. And when I started it in like 2014, we started with 4K, which at the time was prohibitive and it wasn't that common and it was expensive. And now there's 8 and 16K, you know. So it's always was meant to be a digital project. I guess, I don't know if this is answering your question, but the thing that was important to me was the thing I was saying about generationally, this divide between analog media and digital media. The moment of digitization seemed like the site of trauma in a way. And that's the site I wanted to open up. And that place was the book on this book scanner. Yeah. And it so happens that in some of those robotic book scanner situations, it's traumatic for the book as well. It's being destroyed. And it's getting thrown away to become a PDF for the internet. And I'm not sad about that, but it is a sort of almost like a chemical state change from like solid to gas or something. So I'm just interested in that change and zooming in on it, opening it up, and maybe thinking about, oh, it's scanning at such a high rate, it's almost animation speed. Is this, can we make films? You know, so that's sort of what the thinking was. And how it sort of led to these. And I should mention, I was gonna make this massive 2-hour stop motion piece when I first had this idea. And it was gonna be on every possible subject, and then I was killing myself. And then I realized, oh, I can just break this up into volumes. Time Life does, you know? Each series is like 28 volumes, and they come to your house every month or two, and I'm just gonna have one on flowers. Yeah, I was honoring the source material, thank you. I'm gonna make one on flowers, and one on cooking, and one on exercise, and one on Rodin, and one will be a Pantone book, and one will be, you know, and so on. So, and I have another dozen ready to go, you know, and that allows me to be a little more light on my feet and think, you know, like the pottery one just dropped into this set while we were working on them. So there's a little more room for improvisation and turnaround this way.
Thank you.
So between the volumes, there's a lot of what seemed to be like almost like superficial change in terms of like different bodies, different colors of the hummingbird, the decorative arts, and it's a lot to take in. And I found myself looking for like the immutable and the constant at a certain point. And I was curious if you thought about that at all, and just thoughts.
I think that's kind of a necessary condition of the encyclopedic, is that you're sort of veering all over the place. So that's a good question. I think, I know that when I'm making sort of a set, like this is the second set, and it really felt like making a record, you know, and the order of the playlist was super important, and you sort of have your bangers, and you have your experimental tracks, and you have your ballads, you know what I mean? Like, and you have your first song and your last song, and all those choices seemed really important. And you know, so the nudes is figurative, the mimes is figurative, the hummingbird is figurative. You don't want those all together, but they do share some DNA. And there's only one figurative one in the first set. I've become more interested in looking at people since then in these works. But it's a little bit more about it's totally fine if they're incongruous with each other too. Do you know what I mean? Like it's the idea is the thing, if I feel like I can do it or if I'm excited by it. For example, the hummingbird was the first one I used we used video tracks of actual hummingbirds in flight off of YouTube to trace the flight of hummingbirds. Otherwise it was gonna look like a kid made it, you know? Like I wanted you to buy it. And so we sort of had this whole system for trying to follow the behavior of hummingbirds. And not to go too deep into it, but the hummingbird idea was largely around frame rates and what exceeds your vision, which is a hummingbird wing. You can't see it. So, in all motion pictures rely on the illusion of still images running together and becoming motion. And the hummingbird is almost like a living example of a high speed, like this exceeds your perceptual capacity. And so does a lot of these films. So I wanted to kind of just collapse that and make one of the films about a hummingbird. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah.
Yeah. What I love about your work is how sensual and texture and tactile it is. It always moves back to a kind of center of like sensorial experience, but it's embedded within this parameter of the conceptual and just bigger issues. It makes me really wonder, can an artist be anything other than an analog, anything other than an analog approach? Because we are perhaps narrowly trying to make experiences. And that's a strange question, but I wonder, in the process of your work, have you ever thought about?
I'm right there with you. To me, the analog is haptic and gets dust on it. And digital things are touchless and they don't get dust on them. And it's kind of that simple. And that's not to disparage the digital at all. But art, maybe my interest in analog things is an extension of my interest in art and making art, because it's in some respects the last stubbornly analog thing. Because you have musicians losing all their rights to streamers, you have filmmakers and actors and writers losing their rights to streamers. This could still happen to fine art, but it does seem to be uniquely haptic in a way that resists this kind of instrumentalization. Now, that's not to say, sort of generational attention spans won't kill it. At a certain point, I've kind of starting to believe that anything outside this sort of face phone doom loop is, serotonin doom loop is increasingly just a distraction for people, rather than the phone is the distraction from life. Life is a distraction from the phone. So I think that's maybe the threat that the ultimate digital threat to the analog artwork. But I definitely understand exactly what you mean. And I'm always drawn to that's why I love the halftone in the print. That's like the stuff that makes it up. And the book is made of pages, the film is made of frames, the image is made of dots. I want to see all the whole in the part.
Adjourned.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Rita.